and Krishna will be talking about verification of concurrent programs. Over to you, Krishna.
Hi, thank you, Aishwarya. Is my screen visible and am I audible?
Yes, visible and audible.
Thank you. Okay, so this talk is going to be about the verification of concurrent programs under release acquire semantics. So typically, when we talk about concurrent programs, the model is something where we have shared memory. So the classical interpretation for such concurrent programs is with sequential consistency, where the processes interact directly with the shared memory, as you see in this picture. And the typical rules that follow sequential consistency are that processes directly read the latest value written from the shared memory, and whatever the process writes is directly reflected in the shared memory. That apart, the program order is preserved by each of the processes involved. And finally, when we look at any execution, it is the classical interleaving semantics. So here is an example which is similar to the Decker's mutual exclusion protocol. So you see two processes here which share variables x and y. The initial values of x and y are 0. So the first process, it writes 1 to x, signifying its preference to enter the critical section. And the second process is symmetric. And when the second process writes 1 to y, it shows its preference to enter the critical section. So as you can see here, under the sequential consistency semantics, it's clear that at least one of the two processes will be successful in writing 1 either to x or to y. And therefore, we know that at least one of them will enter the critical section. And therefore, if you look at the run to the right, let's say the red process writes 1 to x, and then it reads 0 into its local variable ry. And then the first process can write 1 to y. And therefore, we know that it's not possible for it to read 0. And therefore, it's basically true that the specification written below that both processes do not enter the critical section together happens to be true under sequential consistency. So this is correct under sequential consistency. Now, let's try to understand what happens with release acquire. So even before we go there, if I were to run the same program under the modern processors or compilers, the behaviors you will get are strictly larger than what you get in sequential consistency. And this happens because the modern processors and the compilers, they allow you to reorder instructions, which I will say in a few minutes. And they also allow you to use things like caches and buffers. And this framework of allowing more behaviors is captured by what are called weak memory models. And what I'm going to be talking about today is one such weak memory model known as the release acquire fragment, which is a well-behaved fragment of C11. So in release acquire, the writes are all called release writes and the reads are called acquire reads. So what it means is that when I say a write is a release write, so if I have a write statement, which is a release write, then I will not swap this with any of the writes which appear before this. And likewise, when I have an acquire read, then I will not swap this read operation with any read that comes after this. However, I will allow to swap this write, release write with the acquire read, okay, provided that these come consecutively. So if there is a release write followed by an acquire read, I will allow to swap these two operations in the release acquire. And this is done typically for efficiency reasons. So let's say see the same example, but now interpreted under release acquire. So it's the same program, but now if you look at both the processes, so notice that there is a write operation. So y equal to 1 is a write operation. So it's a release write followed by the acquire read where I'm reading from x into my local variable rx. So because I'm going to allow to swap these two operations, what happens when I execute this program is that now the green process can first read 0 into its local variable rx. Now the first process can write 1 to x, then it can read 0 into its local variable y. And now it's true that the second variable can write 1 to y. However, as you can see, it's possible for both the processes to enter the critical section, therefore violating the specification written below. So notice that this happens because of the extra behavior that comes because of this swap we allow between, or the reordering we allow between instructions. And therefore, we get this bad behavior, which was not exhibited under sequential consistency. So the problem of interest that we have here is that we are given a program and we are also given a state S. So it can be just a control state or control plus memory, whatever it is. And we are interested in safety verification. So what that means is safety verification, we know that boils down to reachability. And the question is, can we check if a particular state S is reachable under the release acquire semantics? And obviously, an immediate question that comes as soon as we ask this is, what is the decidability status of this question and what is the complexity of that? So what we know already is if the processes are finite state, then under sequential consistency, the reachability problem is going to be p-space complete. Now, what we cannot do from this result is that we cannot directly use the techniques that we know to solve this problem under sequential consistency. The main reason is that, as we saw just now, the behaviors under release acquire are going to be more than what we get in sequential consistency. And therefore, the arguments that we use there cannot be directly lifted here because of the extra behaviors and because of the different kind of non-trivial parts that we get in the executions. So what I'll do first is I'll first talk a bit about the operational model for release acquire, and then we will go into this reachability problem.
Question.
Yeah.
Sorry, Krishna. So I just want to clarify one thing about this release acquire. So some read statements are a priori marked as acquire, and some
Yes.
writes are marked as release. Is it?
Yes, yeah. So we can assume in general that if I am going to be focused just on release acquire, I can even assume that every write is a release write and every read is an acquire read.
Okay.
But of course, there is also this other model where I can treat some writes and reads as relaxed. So relaxed meaning I am not treating them as release and I'm not treating the reads as acquire.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Okay, so of course, before we go into the release acquire semantics, first what we know, sequential consistency. As you see here, P1 and P2, the processes of interest are directly talking to the memory. And the memory basically consists of every write made by every process as soon as it is written, so that the process which wants to read takes it immediately. Now, however, when we look at the same thing, the model and the release acquire, the memory is not what it was like there. It is a pool, as you see here. So the memory is a pool consisting of messages. So we call these messages as views. And each message is inserted into this memory pool whenever a process makes a write instruction. So here X and Y are my shared variables. And you see the slabs here is the value that is written into the variable. And the bottom part, which has these two blue slabs, is basically the write operation. So of course, the messages come because of the write operation, and the two blue slabs below here represent timestamps or logical clocks for each shared variable. So as you see here, the message that is currently being pointed at the top part is the value returned to X, and the two 4 and 1 represent the logical clocks with respect to both the shared variables X and Y. So as you can see that the timestamps are natural numbers. So indeed, the message pool is unbounded. It is an unbounded collection of views. And now let's see how exactly we're going to use this. So the only takeaway from this slide right now is that the memory is a collection of messages. A message is entered into the memory pool every time a process makes a write operation. Okay, so that is all the takeaway from this slide at the moment. So let's see this on a small example. So here I have a simple process P. So X and Y are the shared variables. A and B are local variables for the process P1. So apart from this memory pool, each process maintains its local view. So the local view again are a pair of timestamps, one for X, one for Y. So here assume that the local view of the process is 3 and 2. So the first operation that the process is going to execute happens to be this read operation. It is going to read from X and write the value it has read into its local variable A. Okay, so it's a read operation. So how do we do a read operation? So the first thing is, first you look into the memory pool and see what is available to be read. So indeed, I can ignore all the messages which are not pertaining to X. So the messages on Y, I don't care about them. Look at the X messages, and I have two X messages here. Now what can I read, right? So I look at my local view, the local timestamp of the process with respect to X is 3. Therefore, I can only read a message in the memory pool whose timestamp for X is at least 3. Okay, so here I have only one such candidate because the other one is an obsolete message. So I can choose this as a message for my read. And then what happens? I now choose the message and I update my local view using the view in the message. So it's a merge operation, which basically takes a max per variable. And when that happens, the local view of the process gets updated. And indeed, it's also true that the value 1 also gets reflected, and now the local variable A gets a value 1. So this is how a read operation happens. So now let's see how a write operation proceeds. So now the local view of the process is 4 and 2, and I'm going to do the write operation on X. So as we said already, whenever I make a write operation, I'm going to create a new message into my memory pool. So here I'll create a new local view. So when I create the new local view, what I have to do is I have to now choose a timestamp for X, which is larger than my current local view, which is 4 here. And I have to also choose a timestamp which is not already there in the memory. So I can choose, let's say 5, right? And I do not alter the timestamp for Y because I've not done anything with respect to that. I have written the value 2. So this new message gets created. and it's added to the memory pool, and the processor's local view also gets updated. So one operation that I'm not going to be talking about in the interest of time is something called atomic read-write, or also known as compare and swap, which is nothing but a read operation followed by a write operation done atomically. Now, of course, the semantics is simple. The process reads and then it writes. And the semantics for read and write are as you saw here, except that when the process makes a write after the read, the timestamp it chooses has to be something that is just +1 than what was the original timestamp. Okay. Anyway, so I don't think we need it for the technical part of this talk. So I'll just mention that compare and swap is there because you will notice that it will play some role in the decidability results that follow. Okay, so then I have the read operation again, but we already know how to do the read operation. I will focus on the messages with respect to Y. I'll pick that one whose timestamp is larger than the process's local timestamp with respect to Y. So it happens to be this, the value is taken and the view gets updated. So now let's see a proper array run on this simple example of two processes, P1 and P2. And let's say I have the reachability query, which asks, is it possible for me to reach a configuration where the local register R1 has value 0, the local register R2 has value 1, and local register R3 has value 2. So initially notice that the message pool has the initial messages with timestamp 0 and 0, the values are 0 also, and the local views of both processes have 0 and 0 as timestamps. So the first process can start by reading 0. Anyway, that's the only available thing in the message pool. The local view does not change. And now the second process is going to write 1 into Y. So basically it results, the first process is going to write 1 into Y. So it adds a message into the memory pool. And now the second process is going to read that value. So when it reads, notice that its local view gets updated. Then it will make two write operations. It writes 1 to X and then it writes 2 to X. So notice that how the timestamps are increased for both the writes successively. And the last one is that now the first process has to read from X. So notice that the local timestamp of X for the first process is 0. So it can read either from the message in the memory pool whose timestamp is 0 or 1 or 3. So here it just chooses non-deterministically to read the value 2, and therefore basically the local view of the first process becomes 3 and 2. And indeed we see that this reachability query that we wanted to check happens to be true. Okay, so now the results I'm going to summarize here with respect to, first I'll talk about the non-parameterized reachability. So the term non-parameterized basically represents the fact that I know I've been given a concurrent program and I know that I have finite number of threads or bounded number of threads. And the question I'm going to ask is the reachability problem and release acquire. So this work appeared in PLDA 2019 and jointly with Parosh and Fauzi from Uppsala and Jatin, who was then a student at IIT Bombay. Okay, so there's the question of interest, right? The safety verification problem is a given state reachable under release acquire. So the status of this problem was open for quite some time. Unlike sequential consistency, unlike TSO, which is known to be decidable, the status was open and we showed that it's undecidable. And the way we show it is by reduction from the post correspondence problem. So I'll just give the gist of the idea and the main challenges of why the proof was perhaps a bit non-trivial. So we consider 4 processes, P1, P2, P3, and P4. So since we started PCP, the first process is going to guess the set of indices, which will correspond to a solution. And the second process also guesses its own set of solutions with respect to the second list from PCP. And these are basically writers. P1 and P2 are the writers. And whatever they write, the process P3's job is to verify that they've written the same set of indices. Now, as soon as P1 writes its set of indices, it will now write correspondingly the letters corresponding to those the indices from the first list. And same thing for P2, it writes down the sequence of letters. And the job of P4 is to basically verify that these writes made by P1 and P2 are identical. And if P3 and P4 basically verify successfully, obviously it means there is a solution for PCP, and this will result in reachability to some whatever terminal instructions in P1, P2, P3, and P4. So now what's the challenge here, right? The challenge basically is that, so as we saw in the semantics of release acquire, when a process makes a read, it can choose any message to read such that the timestamp of the message being read is higher than its own timestamp or equal to what it is currently, right? Now here for the correctness of this procedure, we need to ensure that P3 and P4 do not jump while reading. What do we mean by jump? A jump basically means that, assume that P1 has written say 100 write operations on some variable. Now P3 can, let's say, choose to read the fifth write operation followed by the 100th write operation, right? It's possible. because it just needs to read something whose timestamp is larger. However, that is not the spirit of verifying it under PCP, right? Because if I want to ensure that I have a solution for PCP, I better be sure that P3 and P4 actually read every write operation by P1 and by P2 exactly in the same order that they did. And to do this, we crucially use the compare and swap or the atomic read-write operation. And using that, we are able to basically show that if P3 and P4 jump, then they basically will not be able to reach the term instruction and they will deadlock. So anyway, having said that, this is one place where compare and swap is used critically, and that ensures that P3 and P4 do their job perfectly well. But this bad news, right? It's undecidable. So how is it going to be useful? So is there a possible workaround? So a very famous classical workaround is what is known as the context-bounded analysis, which is very efficient under approximation technique proposed by Shaskadir and Jacob Rahoff, and subsequently a lot of papers have come up on that. So can we use context-bounded analysis as an under approximation for RA? Okay, so unfortunately, no, because the undecidability you saw on the previous slide actually works with just context-bounded analysis. So the way we can think of the undecidability result is I will first make P1 run completely, then P2, then P3, and then P4. So you will realize that this is just a three bounded run. So a context is essentially a sequence of executions, a sequence of actions by any single fixed process, right? So if I just do P1, P2, P3, P4, it's a 3 bounded run. So context-bounded analysis does not suffice to get back a decidability for us. So this is not an approximation. We need something that's different. So we need a different under approximation for release acquire. So what is that? Right? So let's try to understand what possibly makes sense in the context of release acquire, which is not context-boundedness. So this is something we call view switch. So a simple definition for view switch is that, so think of any run as something I have depicted here on the right. It's essentially the same as the example I had earlier with a small tweak I have done so that the view switch becomes clear. So view switch happens when a process reads a value which is written by another process. That's not enough. Now the view switch really happens when this process changes its view after having made the read. So let's try to look at this figure on the right. So when the second process, the green process, reads the value 1 into y, it is reading the value returned by the first process. So remember that the timestamp was 0 initially. And when the first process wrote to y, it would have chosen a timestamp t, which is strictly larger than 0, right? So when the second process read that y, its timestamp would have increased from 0, resulting in a change of view. So that is definitely a view switch. Now, the second process does 2 writes, and then let's come back to the first process. When the first process reads the value 2 into x, again, that results in a view switch. Why? Because its original timestamp was 0. And when the second process wrote into x, it would have chosen a timestamp which is larger than 0. And therefore, that's a view switch. However, interestingly, note that the second read on y by the first process does not result in a view switch. Why? Because RA is like causal consistency, right? So when the second process read x, it has already merged its local view with the view that was present in the message of x, x2, and it already contained its own. Sorry. Aishwarya, was there a question? Okay, I guess not.
No. Please continue because of other issues. Please continue.
Okay, sure. All right. Yeah. So the point is, of course, so here you see that this run has 2 view switches, and therefore I can call this a 2 bounded run. Okay. So now the under approximation we want to propose is one where the number of view switches are bounded and not the number of context switches. Okay, so how do we define this a bit more formally? So to define a view switch, notice that what is really interesting are those messages which result in a view switch, right? So if you look at the memory pool here, we want to call some messages as essential messages, which basically are going to be useful in the change of view of a process which reads that message. And there are some messages which are redundant, which are never read at all by any process. And there are some messages like in this, for example, in this y3 message, which is useful, but not essential, right? It is useful because I need the value of y, but however, I don't care about the timestamp because I'm not using it as an essential message. So in this particular example, I know that these 2 messages which have been faded out are not essential. The others are essential. And now we want to use this idea that if I can bound the number of essential messages in my memory pool, which basically would result in a bounded memory pool, I can use it to get an efficient under approximation, which will basically help me to answer the question of reachability, but under bounded number of view switches. So interestingly enough, now observe that the undecidability proof that we gave, which had a bounded context, which did not have a bounded view switch. The reason being that the verifiers, the processes P3 and P4 were actually reading every single write written by P1 and P2. So every read they were making was basically changing their view. Okay, so the undecidability required unbounded number of view switches. And that is what we are trying to capitalize on or leverage on so that we get decidability. Okay, so the question that we now reformulate is, can we focus on the K-bounded reachability problem? So these are so basically it's reachability, but restricted to K-bounded runs where the number of view switches is bounded to K. And what we show is that if I ask this question for a concurrent program under release acquire, I can translate any K-bounded as in bounded with respect to view switch execution into a K plus N bounded context reachability problem under SC. So the idea is pretty intuitive if you think about it. So if I have only K essential messages, I can first execute the K processes which give me those K essential messages, right? Now I know that I do not have any more interesting message that has to be generated for my run to be successful. So what this basically means is that when I first run the K message, the K processes which give rise to the K essential messages that can result in at most K context switches. Now, once I have all my messages in the memory pool, I just need to run all my processes, assuming it is N number of processes to completion. So that gives me at most K plus N context switches. And we do a code-to-code translation by instrumenting the given code by some extra things, which I will try to briefly mention. And we can show this reduction. And then the corollary of this basically is that we can show that the K-bounded reachability is decidable for release acquire, because we know that the problem is decidable with respect to bounded context reachability and a sequential consistency. So here is a very, very high level overview of what we have done in this code-to-code translation. So here is an example, right, where I have these two view switches. So we try to do it in two steps. We do a locality and validation. So what do I mean by locality? So I start with my first process, let's say. I know that I have this initial values of X and Y. Now, whenever this process makes a write, I can guess whether this write is going to be contributing to an essential message or not, right? So this guess I can always make. And in this case, because it's an essential message, I'm going to guess it. And if I guess it, I'm going to add it to a global data structure that we maintain, which is visible to all the processes. Now, what you see highlighted here is the process's local view at the end of this write operation. And it also puts this into the global data structure, which is now going to be taken by the second process when it runs. Now, the second process now can use this, can read this from the global data structure. It will run whatever it wants to run. And whenever it finishes running its part, now, again, it can also guess, right? Whatever writes it's going to make, is it going to be contributing to an essential message? If so, it will basically write to the same global data structure, which can be taken by the first process, and we keep going. So this is how we do the locality. Now, of course, the validation part requires that we need to verify whether our guesses is correct. So these interfaces are the places where we basically guess whether some message is essential or not and decide based on whether to add it to the global data structure and to the the bounded message pool that we maintain or not. So for the locality, what we do is we can run the first process under sequential consistency, where we basically verify whether these interfaces make sense, right? So I can just say, okay, starting from X0, Y0, is it possible for me to check that this interface where Y is 1 is an essential message is correct? I can do the same thing for the second process. I'll simulate P2 under sequential consistency. And then provided I'm successful in doing that, I now need to verify that the interfaces are compatible with each other, right? So which basically means that this first essential message, which I guessed was essential, can the second process start with X0, Y0, take this guy, the one which is guessed to be essential, and then does it lead me to this interface? Is it compatible again with the first process and so on? So we have implemented this and in a tool called View Bounded Model Checker. So we take this input program and then we convert it to the instrumented program. That's what VBMC does. And we feed it to CDMC, which is standard tool for checking reachability. And we saw that we verified this on all the standard litmus tests and for correctness, of course, and it agreed with all the results given by HERD, the standard tool. And we also tested on concurrent benchmarks to see how efficient it is to isolate bugs. So what we saw is that when we compared the classical state-of-the-art stateless model checking tools like Tracer, RCMC, and CDS Checker, VBMC was able to isolate bugs much more quicker, especially when the bugs are happening in only one thread, or when the bug has a smaller probability. So let's say if the bug is in just one isolated place in the program, then the SMC tools take much longer because they're exploring every possible trace, but VBMC is much quicker there. Of course, when you think of safe programs, right? So to make a program safe, we can fence all the processes, all the threads to make it safe. And in such situations, of course, the SMC tools are much more efficient. So in some sense, the goal of both these tools are really different. So SMC tools, their goal is much more exploring every possible trace, right? Whereas VBMC's goal is just reachability, trying to isolate a bug. But one can use these tools in a complementary manner, and it basically will help, especially if you have bugs which are isolated somewhere in the code. Okay, so this is the end of the first part where I'm going to, where I was planning to talk about the non-parameterized case. Now, in the interest of time, I'm just going to summarize the results for the parameterized case. So what do we mean by the parameterized case, right? So the parameterized case is that, again, I have a concurrent program under release acquire. The number of processes now are no longer bounded. Okay, so a priori, I do not have a bound on the number of processes. So this is the parameterized case. And this work is yet unpublished. It's available on archive. So this was done when Advait was a student at IIT Bombay, and it was also done with Roland from Braunschweig. So the one thing that immediately catches your eye is, okay, it is already undecidable. So of course, it's going to be terribly undecidable with unboundedly many processes, right? There's an inherent undecidability. So what can be done, right? So unless we have some special conditions, unless we have some special whatever restrictions we are going to place, we are not going to get decidability. Okay, so let's see one case where we can get decidability. So the setting is, now imagine that I have this unbounded number of processes, which are all identical threads, and assume that I do not have CAS operations. Okay, now it may look a very strong restriction. How can you disallow CAS operations? But it is not, because as we show, even if you allow CAS operations on this sequence, unbounded sequence of identical threads, even if they are acyclic, we can simulate the parameterized reachability problem that was shown undecidable in PLDA 19, and therefore having no CAS seems to be a reasonable restriction. So this one, okay, so as long as we allow identical threads, we are going to disallow CAS. Again, one thing you can see for those of you who have seen RA semantics before, you can also see that the moment you allow CAS operations, this identical threads, the status of being identical is no longer true, because as I said, the CAS operations, the way they work, make threads distinguishable from others, and therefore that's yet another reason why it makes sense not to have CAS operations in identical threads. So now, what are the kind of results we have, right? So we allow an unbounded bunch of such identical threads with no CAS operations, but we throw in some bounded number of distinguished threads where we allow CAS operations, but suppose we keep them acyclic for the moment. Now, the results we have here is we can show p-space completeness for the reachability problem by reducing from the QBF set and reducing to the query evaluation linear data log. And this is one result we have. Of course, can we do better, right? So this is what I had, unboundedly many operations, and basically bounded number of distinguished ones which has CAS operations. Now let me throw in an unrestricted distinguished thread. So unrestricted means it is cyclic, it has CAS operations. Then what happens? Then we get an XP time completeness. Now, can I do more, right? Can I throw in yet another guy? Suppose I throw into this bunch yet another guy who does not have a CAS operation. So notice that it can be cyclic, but as long as it does not have CAS operations, we already shoot to non-primitive recursive. Now, what more can I do, right? Now, does it make sense for me to have this yellow thread, which I've thrown in to be having CAS operation, but which is cyclic, but that will be like one of this already boundedly many I have already, right? So it doesn't change my story. So the only thing that remains now is what happens if the yellow thread is unrestricted. Can I say something? So far, no, we don't know the status. Is it decidable? It's not yet clear. And of course, this is still work under progress. So it's also eminently open what other under approximations we can think of, and useful case studies, benchmarks, all this is still open. However, what I had to say, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Krishna, for the very interesting talk. Questions?
Okay, so, hi, I'm Abhishek. So, Krishna, I wanted to ask, what do you mean by acyclic in the last time in part of your talk? I didn't get exactly cyclic and acyclic thing when you talked about parameterized. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So what I meant was, okay, so by cyclic, what I meant was, right, if you have loops in the program, that's what I wanted to say as cyclic.
Okay.
Yeah, an acyclic program is just a straight line code, right? It does not have loops.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So another question I had. So you mentioned in your talk that somehow you use this RMW or atomic read write to show this reduction from PCP to your case of RA. So what about, I mean, RA minus, let's say, this RMW? I mean, exactly, I mean, in the unbounded case.
So very good question. It's wide open, and it doesn't seem to go either way. We have tried for some number of times, and it doesn't seem to, nothing happens basically. So we are stuck in between. We don't know.
Okay, I see. So there are some, I mean, decidability. Yeah.
Sorry, we know something. We know it is non-primitive recursive, but that doesn't help much.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's just a lower bound, right? We still don't know if it is for sure decidable or does it shoot to undecidable. This we don't know.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Aishwarya, I think Aishwarya is muted.
Here,
Yeah.
I can, Krishna? You have a
Hi.
question? Hi, so in the non-parameterized setting, just to understand, so the undecidability comes because some commands can get reordered by an unbounded number of times, right? Like they can
That's
just
right.
go across loops and
Absolutely.
is that
Yeah. So the undecidability basically allowed to have loops, and it required compare and swap in a major way. And this was crucial to get the undecidability.
I see. So if I just restrict to acyclic, I don't know whether they are of interest. So it should be decidable. And is it some p-space complete or something like that?
So the fragment you want is, so you want to allow compare and swap, but you do not want loops, right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you disallow compare and swap, if you allow compare and swap, if you disallow loops, yeah, that should be true. I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
so this compare and swap is exactly what amounted to your view switches, right? The important.
Yeah. Okay. So compare and swap is fine with view switches. Okay. So when we spoke about view switches, we had no restriction. The program is, you can have read operations, write operations, and compare and swap. The only thing we said was that the number of messages in the memory pool is really bounded, right? That is essentially what this view switch is doing, right? Because anytime a process's view changes, it is because it has read a message in the memory pool, and the result of reading it, its view got changed, right? This is essentially what happened. So if you can, a very naive way of putting it is that, okay, the view switch, of course, makes sense for array. However, what it does really is that the otherwise unbounded memory pool becomes a bounded memory pool if you really throw away the redundant messages, right? Of course, by itself, it does not become bounded. But in our translation to sequential consistency, what we realized is that what we really need are the essential messages, right? For example, in this, when I write this x2 here, I need this, right? Because it is going to change my view. And, there may be, this is not the correct slide. Sorry, give me a second. Ah, exactly. So here, this x2 is an essential message. But notice that when I wrote this y3, because I write x2 after y3, right? The message corresponding to y3 is no longer essential because the view of y has been incorporated in the message of x. So as long as I remember the value of the latest write by every process, it is sufficient. In other words, I can bound my memory pool, which basically gave us decidability.
Okay. Thanks, Krishna. Any more questions?
Yeah, if I have time, then I can ask one more question. So, yeah. So Krishna, I mean, after your result, so if I am correct, I mean, there were two decidable results also, one on more restricted version, they call it probably SRA, strong release acquire, and one on WRA.
Correct.
In both of them, they, use this well Quasi-ordering
That's right.
kind of mapping. So, so that's why, I asked that question. Is it, what looking in that direction, mapping your that segment on RA minus this RMW thing and then trying something similar?
Okay. See, the point is, since in strong release acquire, the whole SRA itself is decidable even with compare and swap thrown inside. Okay. So the main difference between RA and SRA, if you were to think of it in axiomatic sense, is now in RA, we disallow, cycles. If I look at the graph, right, the traces, right, we disallow cycles in a per variable fashion. Whereas in strong release acquire, we disallow cycles, but it is not per location. It's not per variable. So SRA decidability is known already even with compare and swap. So it doesn't help us really in deciding the status of the RA reachability problem with compare and or without compare and swap, unfortunately.
Okay. And the weaker one, where you don't have actually these global kind of, restriction on cycles. So you don't have even, that also I think appeared recently sometime back.
Yeah. So weak RA also allows compare and swap. I don't exactly remember the axiomatic description they have on traces, but unfortunately, the thing is, neither of them directly help us in settling this open question.
Okay. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Krishna. The next session will be at 12. So we still have about 20 minutes, but maybe, so this is a break time. So maybe if there are more questions, Krishna, if you're free, you can take them.
Sure. Yeah, I anyway have to continue the next session, so I'm not going away.
Okay. Yeah, so feel free to ask questions to Krishna. So the next session will start at 12.
Before that, thanks, Krishna.
Thank you.